Chapter 17. Yuck, yuck. Hannah Gruen looked out the window. She was horrified by the sight below her. "Oh, Nancy!" she wailed. The housekeeper hurried down the front stairway as fast as she could and raced out the front door. As she approached the Belgian shepherd, he growled menacingly, while still pinning Nancy to the ground. Suddenly, courage returned to Hannah Gruen. She rushed around the corner of the house to where a hose was coiled around a hook in the foundation. After quickly unwinding it, she turned on the water full force, then hurried to the front. "Sorry to get you wet, Nancy," she called, "but I hope this will drive the beast away." The dog did not like the water and kept twisting his head to avoid it. As Hannah approached him and the stream became more forceful, he suddenly shifted his position. His paws slipped from Nancy's back. She was free. Keeping her back to Hannah, Nancy stepped out of the dog's way until she had reached the housekeeper's side. The animal, almost blinded by the hard stream of water, gradually turned away, whimpering and growling alternately. Finally he gave up and, dripping wet, slunk down the street. Togo had escaped long before this and had hidden behind a large rhododendron bush. Now he reappeared, ran toward the sidewalk, and barked importantly, as if he had been responsible for outwitting the big Belgian shepherd. Hannah looked at Nancy. "You're certainly a sight. How do you feel?" Nancy replied, "I feel like following that dog to his house, but I don't have to. I know whom he belongs to. I saw the name on his collar just before he knocked me down. Who owns such a fierce beast?" "Aslan Appa." Hannah looked alarmed. "The man with the scimitars?" The young detective nodded. "Hannah, it seems as if we are calling the police morning, noon, and night. But would you mind reporting that dog and the name on his collar?" The housekeeper did this while Nancy went to take a shower. When she came downstairs, Mrs. Gruen told her that the police had already captured the dog. "They think he was set on you on purpose," she reported. They traced the dog through its license tag and picked him up at the house where Aslan Appa had been living. The police learned that he had told the boarding house owner he was leaving, but did not say where he was going. Aslan Appa had packed his clothes, taken the dog along, and said goodbye. The police said this was not unusual, because rumors come and go frequently. Nancy's brow furrowed in anger. "That man is a heartless crook," she cried. "He apparently abandoned the dog." "It's a good thing," Hannah replied. "The police said that dog is a killer, that he had been army trained. It was fortunate he didn't bite you. Perhaps he smelled Togo's scent on you and figured you weren't unfriendly. He's at the pound in solitary confinement." Nancy realized how lucky she had been. The dog might have killed her. She put the frightening incident out of her mind and said, "I wonder if Aslan Appa, when he realized the rug did not contain valuable jewels, decided to go back to Turkey." The Druze reported this possibility to the police, who said they would stop the man if he tried to leave the country. They were sure that he intended to sneak out, probably under an assumed name. Nancy finished her packing, then checked with her friends and with the travel bureau. Everything seemed to be running smoothly. Mr. Drew and the 4 girls from River Heights were to meet the boys in New York the following afternoon. From there they would fly to Brussels, Belgium, then go directly to Istanbul. That evening, Nancy got in touch with Chief McGinnis, but he had no leads on the vanished Aslan Appa. The next day, when Nancy told the full story to the group at the New York airport, all of them were sure her path and Aslan Appa's would cross in Istanbul. "I hope he won't set another ferocious dog on you," Bess said. The wait in Brussels was short, and the travelers reached the Istanbul airport a few hours later. Sunday had literally flown by, and according to Turkish time, it was near noon on Monday. Ned spoke up. "Our group is so large. I guess we'll have to go in 2 dolmas." He grinned at the others. "That means taxi." The tour leader, Mr. Randolph, wished them all a pleasant stay in Istanbul. Now you're on your own. All this time Aisha had been looking around for her parents. Suddenly she saw them. The others smiled as the couple clasped her in their arms. Then she introduced Mr. and Mrs. Hatun. Aisha looked just like her pretty mother. The family lived in western Turkey, but had arranged for rooms at the homes of two friends with large houses. The girls would stay at one, Mr. Drew and the boys at the other. "My parents will spend a short time here," Aisha said. "When you leave, I will go and make them a long visit." After their luggage was assembled, two dolmas were summoned. Mrs. Hatun invited the girls to ride with her and her daughter. Since the mother spoke little English, Aisha became their guide. Mr. Drew and the boys joined Mr. Hatun in the other taxi. Their driver, who spoke fluent English, introduced himself as a student at the University of Istanbul. Once they were on their way, he did not have to be prompted to identify the famous landmarks. The airport was out of town, but as they approached the city, both guides pointed out a mammoth circular wall. That encompassed the old city, Aisha told the girls. Soon they came to a bridge which was named for Ataturk, Turkey's first president, and crossed the narrow stretch of water called the Golden Horn that connected with the Bosporus Strait. There were so many things to see, Nancy craned her neck this way and that, so as not to miss anything. Since it was noon hour, the streets were crowded with businessmen, shoppers, and foreign visitors. "I noticed there was a preponderance of men," Nancy remarked. "Also that some of the peasant women wear traditional long black skirts and headscarves drawn over their faces." Aisha said that while Turkey is now Western in its thinking and has adopted the clothes and business and banking methods of Europe, many of the old customs remain. One of these is that married women stay in their homes a great part of the time. Later on, you will probably see some of them in the mosques. They usually come in groups. Aisha directed their driver to two estates on the outskirts of the city. The taxi carrying their companions pulled up behind. Mr. Hatun got out and went inside with Mr. Drew and the boys. He returned in a few minutes, and his taxi followed the other. Presently they entered a gateway which was part of a highly ornamented iron fence. They went past lovely gardens with a profusion of roses and finally came to a large house. The architecture was like that of old Greece, an oblong building of smooth stone fronted with many columns. The group got out. Aisha and her mother led the way to the massive front door. They used the knocker once, and the door was opened by a servant wearing a traditional Turkish uniform. He bowed low. As the man walked off to announce the newcomers to his master and mistress, Bess grabbed Nancy's hand and whispered, "Oh, isn't it romantic? I'm so glad we didn't have to go to a hotel." In a few minutes, their host and his wife came in. They were wearing simple Western-style daytime clothes. Aisha introduced them as Mr. and Mrs. Rosny, old friends. The couple shook hands and apologized for not speaking English very well. Mr. Rosny said, "We are happy to have you come. We hope you will enjoy your visit." His eyes twinkled. "Which is the young lady with the mystery?" Aisha presented Nancy. Then in turn she introduced Bess and George. After the visitors had freshened up, they enjoyed a delicious luncheon. It consisted of rice sprinkled with bits of lamb and served with a curry sauce. This was followed by small bowls of fruit with grapes, figs, and dates. A pink custard sauce had been poured over the fruit. A short time later, Mr. and Mrs. Hatun said they must start for home. When they had driven off, Aisha said, "Mr. and Mrs. Rosny have engaged a small bus to take all of us sightseeing. As soon as you girls are ready, we will pick up the boys and start our tour." She smiled. "I suppose the biggest clue to finding Farouk is the shoeshine stand. I do not know exactly where any are, but we'll look around the bazaars." The bus driver was young and very handsome. Bess whispered to George and Nancy, This place is so full of good-looking men. It's fortunate I have a date of my own, or I'd be tempted to accept an invitation from one of these Turkish boys." "Better not let Dave hear you say that," George advised. "Unless you pick out a mannequin." The others giggled. They picked up the boys at the Cockton home and started their tour. Mr. Drew went off to call on a law school acquaintance. The sightseers crossed the Ataturk Bridge once more and went directly to one of the mosques. "This is called the Suleiman Mosque," Aisha said. "We will not go inside, but I brought you here to show you something I'm sure you have never seen in your country. The Quran states that anyone entering the mosque must have clean feet. There are several places outside the building for foot bathing." There was a park-like area at one side of the building. In it stood a small circular section depressed below the ground. There was a ledge all the way around for men to sit on. Below the ledge were faucets of water. Farther on, hugging the side of the mosque, was a row of faucets with benches to sit on and bathe one's feet. Nearly all of them were filled. "Now all these men will go inside and pray," Aisha said. "You know Muslims pray 5 times a day." The visitors left the park and the bus took them to the outskirts of the Grand Bazaar. Aisha explained that the shops in it paid rent to the Blue Mosque. Excitedly, the group walked toward the huge conglomerate of shops under one vast roof. Just before entering it, Nancy grabbed Ned's arm. "A shoeshine stand!" In front of a building stood the ornate object, with colorful tile insets depicting old-time scenes. Apparently they had been taken from Turkish legend and were framed in a rectangle of gold. On either side of it were golden wing-like projections that glistened in the sun. The shoeshine man sat behind it cross-legged. He smiled at the group. On impulse, Nancy decided to ask him if he spoke English. If so, she would inquire if he knew Mr. Farouk Tahmasp. As she approached the shoeshine man, he stood up, waved his arms wildly, and cried out, "Yak! Yak!" Nancy was puzzled. She asked Aisha what yak meant and was told, "An emphatic no." The Turkish girl spoke to the man, then translated. "He thinks you want to have your shoes shined, but says he never shines a woman's shoes on her feet." The young people smiled at the misunderstanding, and Nancy said, "I don't want my shoes shined. I was merely going to ask if he knows Farouk." The shoeshine man said he had never served nor heard of Farouk Tahmasp. While they were talking, George noticed a young man running toward them. She turned to the Turkish girl and asked, "Aisha, is this Farouk coming?" The girl looked. For a few seconds she did not reply. The others watched tensely. Finally, the man drew closer, and Aisha shook her head. A look of disappointment crossed her face. Bess put an arm over the girl's shoulders. "Cheer up, Aisha," she said. "We'll find him yet." The Turkish girl said nothing and led the way into the bazaar. The din was deafening. Bells jangled. Hawkers called out their wares, ranging from copper cooking utensils to leather luggage. Crowds of people, mostly Turkish men and tourists, milled along the narrow streets. Dogs roamed at will. The whole area was well lighted by unshaded electric bulbs in many of the open front shops, particularly where men were urging passers-by to purchase their jewelry. There were markets with cuts of lamb and dried fish hanging up, and bakeries with baklava and other pastries. The travelers rambled on. They decided to keep close together, because there were so many people coming and going that one could easily become separated from the group. But every now and then one of them would pause to look at the various articles for sale and would have to catch up with the others. Aisha became concerned and requested that all of them stay with the group. After walking several blocks, she came to a halt. "You say in your country you count noses," she said, smiling. "I will now count your noses." Bess was not with them. "Did anyone see her?" Dave asked, worried. "Not lately," they all admitted. Dave said nervously, "She was right alongside me back there a little ways. I'll go and look for her." "We all will go," said Aisha. They peered into every shop as they retraced their steps. Bess was not in any of them, nor was she on the street. Her friends became genuinely alarmed. End of chapter 17.